A dull sky looms over the industrial zone as the afternoon falls into silence. Three firefighters cross an abandoned lot where chemical mud puddles bubble in the background. In the center, a German shepherd appears, buried up to his neck, breathing with difficulty. Without making a sound, the dog stays still, covered in debris and flies. A woman approaches, holding a baby, staring at the animal. The baby climbs down, crawls to the dog, and presses his forehead to the dog's. And for a second, everything stopped. Love animal stories? Then subscribe now and don't miss a thing. Thanks for following along. Now, back to our story. What seemed like just another routine call turned into an episode that would forever mark the memory of the firefighters of Bayou Creek, a small coastal town nestled along the Gulf Coast. An anonymous alert led the team to a vacant lot on the outskirts of the industrial area, where sewage and debris from an old chemical factory formed dark, dense puddles. The scene they found there would shock even the most experienced. Buried up to his neck in thick, greenish-colored mud with an unbearable odor, a German shepherd was struggling to keep his head up. The animal wasn't barking or crying, just breathing with difficulty, as if he had accepted his own fate. There were no visible marks of violence, but the way he was trapped indicated intention. The location was difficult to access, which made the firefighters believe that someone had deliberately taken him there. Fire Chief Jake Thompson, a 30-year veteran with weathered skin and kind eyes, had seen his share of animal rescues, but something about this one hit differently. The dog's eyes, amber and clear despite his dire situation, seemed to hold a quiet dignity that struck Jake to his core. "We need a veterinarian here ASAP," Jake called into his radio, "and bring the specialized extraction equipment. This isn't going to be easy." The team worked methodically, careful not to disturb the toxic mud more than necessary. Environmental specialist Nathan Reed arrived shortly after, his face grim as he took samples of the greenish sludge. "This stuff is bad news, Jake," Nathan muttered, keeping his voice low so the others wouldn't hear. "Looks like industrial waste, probably from the old Chemtech plant." The first unexpected turn came with the arrival of a woman with a baby in her arms, attracted by the commotion. She was a resident of the nearby area, quiet and reserved, who rarely interacted with her neighbors. When the baby spotted the dog, he stretched his hands toward the animal and began to babble disconnected words, visibly agitated. Against all expectations, the baby squirmed until the mother hesitantly placed him on the ground. And then something surprising happened. The baby, still crawling, approached the dog trapped in the mud and rested his forehead against the animal's, remaining that way for long seconds in silence. The gesture disarmed everyone. The dog, who until then could barely keep himself upright, slightly raised his head and let out an audible sigh. This unexpected connection between the two beings awakened a sense of urgency in the firefighters, who redoubled their efforts. The extraction of the animal lasted almost 3 hours, involving improvised equipment and extreme care not to worsen skin contamination and gas inhalation. Meanwhile, the baby didn't move away. The mother, visibly emotional, revealed something that would completely change the course of the narrative. That dog had disappeared more than 4 months ago. It was the same dog that used to roam the street where they lived, the only being with whom the baby showed spontaneous affection. The emotional connection between them was already deep, even before the reunion. "His name is Max," the woman said softly. "At least, that's what we called him. He wasn't ours officially, but he would come by our house every day. Ethan, my son, he would light up whenever Max appeared. Then one day, Max just stopped coming." Jake studied the woman's face. "Ma'am, I didn't catch your name." Sarah Miller." She bounced the baby gently in her arms. And this is Ethan. As the rescue operation continued, Sarah explained that she had moved to Bayou Creek just over a year ago, seeking a fresh start after her husband had left her while she was still pregnant. She worked remotely as a graphic designer, which allowed her to care for Ethan without the expense of daycare. The stray German Shepherd had started visiting their yard about 6 months ago, and though Sarah had initially been cautious, the dog had proven to be gentle and protective, especially around Ethan. It was the strangest thing, Sarah told Jake as they watched the rescue team work. Ethan was just learning to crawl, and Max would lie down at the edge of his blanket like he was standing guard, never too close but always watching. By the time Dr. Lisa Ramirez, the local veterinarian, arrived, the extraction was nearing completion. The firefighters had constructed a makeshift platform and were carefully lifting the dog from the toxic sludge. The animal's lower body was covered in the viscous green substance, his fur matted and stained. "He's going to need immediate decontamination," Dr. Ramirez said, already preparing a mobile treatment station from the back of her SUV. "And then we'll need to get him to my clinic. I can't assess the full damage." Here, as Max was finally freed from the mud, a collective sigh of relief passed through the gathered crowd. But the celebration was short-lived as the dog collapsed onto the stretcher, his strength finally giving out now that he was safe. "Is he going to make it?" Sarah asked, her voice breaking slightly. Beside her, Ethan began to fuss, reaching toward the dog with urgent grabbing motions. Dr. Ramirez didn't offer false hope. "I don't know. The toxic exposure is severe. We'll do everything we can, but you should prepare yourself." What no one expected was Ethan's reaction. The baby, normally quiet and reserved according to his mother, began to wail inconsolably as Max was loaded into Dr. Ramirez's vehicle. The cry was so heart-wrenching that several of the tough firefighters had to look away, suddenly finding interesting details to examine in their equipment. Jake Thompson, moved by the scene, made an impulsive decision. "Mom, Sarah, would you like to follow us to the clinic? Maybe having Ethan nearby might help the dog somehow." Dr. Ramirez raised an eyebrow, but didn't object. In her 20 years of veterinary practice, she had seen enough unusual bonds between animals and humans to know better than to dismiss them. The small procession, Dr. Ramirez's vehicle, followed by Sarah's compact car with Jake's fire department, SUV bringing up the rear, made its way through the quiet streets of Bayou Creek toward the veterinary clinic on the edge of town. As they drove, Nathan Reed stayed behind at the site, collecting more samples and taking photographs. The environmental specialist had a troubled expression as he surveyed the area. This wasn't just a random toxic spill. The concentration and type of chemicals suggested deliberate dumping, and the way the dog had been positioned, almost as if on display, spoke of human intention. Nathan pulled out his phone and made a call to the Environmental Protection Agency office in the nearest major city. This was beyond the scope of local authorities. At the veterinary clinic, Dr. Ramirez worked quickly, hooking Max up to IV fluids and carefully cleaning the toxic residue from his fur and skin. The dog was conscious but weak, his eyes following the movements in the room with a watchful wariness. "The good news is that his vitals are surprisingly stable," Dr. Ramirez told Sarah, who sat in the waiting room with Ethan on her lap. "The bad news is that we don't know what kind of chemicals he was exposed to or for how long. We'll need to run extensive tests." As if understanding the gravity of the conversation, Ethan began to squirm, pointing insistently toward the treatment room where Max was being kept. "He wants to see him," Sarah explained, a note of wonder in her voice. "I've never seen him this attached to anyone or anything." Dr. Ramirez hesitated, weighing medical protocol against the unusual situation. Normally I wouldn't allow this, but let's try something. If you'll put on protective gear, you can bring Ethan in for just a moment. Sometimes familiar presences can be therapeutic. They suited up in paper gowns, gloves, and masks, though getting Ethan to keep his mask on proved nearly impossible. When they entered the treatment room, Max, who had been lying listlessly on the examination table, immediately raised his head. His tail, still coated with traces of green despite the initial cleaning, thumped weakly against the metal surface. Ethan lunged forward in his mother's arms, babbling excitedly. Sarah carefully approached, allowing Ethan to reach out a small hand toward the dog. What happened next would become the talk of Bayou Creek for years to come. Max, summoning strength that Dr. Ramirez would later describe as medically improbable, raised himself to a sitting position and gently pressed his nose against Ethan's outstretched palm. The baby giggled, a sound that Sarah realized with a shock she had rarely heard from her often solemn child. "I've never seen anything like this," Dr. Ramirez whispered, watching the interaction with professional curiosity. "It's almost as if they know each other," Sarah finished, "really know each other in some way we don't understand." Jake Thompson, who had been observing from the doorway, cleared his throat. "I've been doing this job for 30 years, and I've learned that sometimes the connections between living beings go deeper than we can explain." He paused, then added, "I think we should call him Guardian, because that's what he seems to be for your son." The second act of the story unfolds amid the recovery of the animal, now christened Guardian by the rescue team in honor of his resilience. Tests revealed dangerous levels of toxins in the dog system, requiring experimental treatment supported by an animal protection NGO that offered to cover the costs. However, questions arose about the legality of the dog staying with the Miller family, since technically he had no registered owner. 2 weeks after the rescue, Bayou Creek's small veterinary clinic had become a hub of activity. Dr. Lisa Ramirez had called in colleagues from neighboring towns for consultations, and the waiting room often hosted a small gathering of locals bringing homemade treats for the staff and asking for updates on the German Shepherd that had captured the community's attention. "His blood work is still concerning," Dr. Ramirez explained to Sarah Miller one rainy Tuesday afternoon. Ethan was asleep in his carrier, exhausted from the morning's visit with Guardian. The baby had developed a routine of sitting beside the dog's kennel, babbling quietly as if telling stories that only Guardian could understand. "The toxins are breaking down, but more slowly than I'd hoped. And there are compounds here I can't even identify without specialized equipment." Sarah tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, a nervous habit she'd developed since the rescue. "What does that mean for his recovery?" Before Dr. Ramirez could answer, the clinic door swung open, bringing in a gust of damp air and a tall man in an impeccably tailored suit. He shook raindrops from his umbrella before folding it neatly. "Dr. Ramirez, I'm Mark Wilson, Executive Director of Second Chance Animal Rescue." He extended a hand, then noticed Sarah. "Mrs. Miller, I presume? I've heard a lot about you and your son." Sarah felt a flutter of unease. How did this stranger know who she was? As if reading her thoughts, Mark smiled warmly. "Small towns, news travels fast, especially news about remarkable bonds between children and animals. May I sit?" Without waiting for an answer, he took a seat across from them, placing a leather portfolio on his lap. "I've come with a proposal that I believe will benefit everyone, especially Guardian." Dr. Ramirez raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening." Mark outlined a comprehensive plan. Second Chance would fund an experimental treatment protocol for Guardian, drawing on cutting-edge research in toxicology and veterinary medicine. In return, they wanted to document the case, both the medical aspects and the unusual connection between the dog and Ethan. We've secured a grant specifically for cases like this, Mark explained. Instances where the human-animal bond transcends ordinary relationships and ventures into something therapeutic. The foundation funding us is particularly interested in the developmental impacts on children. Sarah shifted uncomfortably. You want to study my son like a lab experiment? Mark's expression softened. Not at all. We merely want to observe and document the interactions naturally, with your full consent and involvement. No invasive procedures, nothing that would stress either Ethan or Guardian. He leaned forward, his voice earnest. Mrs. Miller, what we're offering is the best possible care for Guardian at no cost to you. The documentation is secondary. Before Sarah could respond, a commotion from the treatment area caught their attention. One of the veterinary technicians rushed out, looking flustered. Dr. Ramirez, Guardian's having some kind of episode. The next few minutes were a blur as they rushed to the kennel area. Guardian was on his side, legs rigid, body trembling. His eyes were open but unfocused, and a thin line of drool leaked from his mouth. Seizure, Dr. Ramirez muttered, already reaching for medications. Nancy, get me the diazepam, now. As the staff worked to stabilize the dog, Sarah felt a stirring against her chest. Ethan, woken by the commotion, began to fuss. When he caught sight of Guardian convulsing on the floor of the kennel, his fussing escalated to an ear-splitting wail. What happened next would be recorded in Mark Wilson's official report as an anomalous neurological synchronicity event, but to those present, it was nothing short of miraculous. As Ethan's cries grew louder, Guardian's seizure began to subside. By the time Sarah had crossed the room to the kennel, the dog was already regaining awareness, his eyes clearing and focusing directly on the sobbing child. With visible effort, Guardian dragged himself to a sitting position, then to his feet, swaying slightly but unmistakably moving toward Ethan. Don't move, Dr. Ramirez whispered to Sarah. Let's see what happens. Guardian pressed his nose against the carrier, exactly where Ethan's small hand was reaching through the opening. The contact seemed to calm both of them simultaneously. The baby's cries tapered off, and the dog's trembling eased. Mark Wilson, who had witnessed the entire scene, stood speechless for a moment. Then he quietly pulled out his phone and discreetly recorded a short video. That's exactly the kind of interaction our researchers are interested in, he said later, when Guardian had been settled back in his kennel with monitoring equipment attached and Ethan was peacefully napping. Again, there's growing evidence that certain animals can develop empathic responses to human emotional states, but what we just saw goes beyond that. It was almost as if they were communicating on some level. Dr. Ramirez nodded thoughtfully. The seizure stopped much faster than it should have with his toxicity levels. Medically speaking, that shouldn't have happened. Sarah remained quiet, processing what she had witnessed. Finally, she looked at Mark. If I agree to your proposal, what exactly would it entail for Ethan and for Guardian? Mark outlined a program that included advanced medical care for Guardian at a specialized facility, regular documented interaction sessions between the dog and Ethan, developmental assessments for the baby, and temporary housing for Sarah and Ethan near the treatment center. The initial phase would last about 2 months, he explained. After that, assuming Guardian's condition stabilizes, we'd transition to home-based care with regular check-ins. And legally? Sarah asked. Would Guardian officially become ours? This was where complications arose. As Mark explained, Guardian's status was ambiguous. He had no microchip, no registration, and legally was considered a stray. The town's animal control had waived their usual holding period due to his medical condition, but formal adoption would require paperwork, fees, and potentially home inspections. Second Chance can facilitate all of that, Mark assured her. We have a legal team specifically for these situations. As they discussed logistics, Jake Thompson arrived at the clinic, still in his firefighter uniform. He'd been stopping by regularly to check on Guardian, a habit that had not gone unnoticed by the clinic staff or by Sarah. "How's our patient today?" he asked, then read the room's somber atmosphere. "What happened?" After Dr. Ramirez explained the seizure and its unusual resolution, Jake ran a hand through his salt and pepper hair. "I'm not surprised. There's something special about those two." Sarah introduced Jake to Mark Wilson, explaining the proposal from Second Chance. Jake listened carefully, his expression growing increasingly concerned. "So you'd be taking Guardian to a facility in... where exactly?" "Our research center is in Houston," Mark replied, "about 4 hours from here." Jake frowned. "That's quite a disruption for a single mother and an infant." "We'd cover all expenses," Mark reiterated, "and the treatment Guardian needs simply isn't available locally." The conversation was interrupted by Nathan Reed, the environmental specialist, who burst into the clinic with an urgent expression. "Sorry to interrupt, but we've got a situation." He held up a tablet displaying chemical analysis results. The samples from the dump site came back. The compounds match waste products from Chemtech Industries. The plant that was supposedly decommissioned 3 years ago. Jake's expression darkened. "That's impossible. That place has been locked down since the EPA order." "Apparently not locked down enough," Nathan replied grimly. "And there's more. I found evidence of recent activity. Tire, tracks, disturbed soil, even what looks like a security system that's been tampered with. Someone's been using that site, and recently." Mark Wilson's interest was immediately piqued. This could be relevant to Guardian's treatment protocol, if we knew exactly what chemicals he was exposed to. "Wait," Sarah interrupted, a new worry dawning. "If someone's been illegally using that site, and they deliberately put Guardian there, what if they come looking for him? Or worse, what if they're watching us now?" The question hung in the air, giving voice to a concern that no one had wanted to acknowledge. The deliberate nature of Guardian's abandonment had been obvious from the start, but the implications that someone might have targeted the dog specifically added a disturbing new dimension to the situation. Jake placed a reassuring hand on Sarah's shoulder. "I don't think you need to worry about that, but just to be safe, I'll ask some of the guys from the department to keep an extra eye on your place for a while." As the discussion continued about Guardian's treatment options and the investigation into the Chemtech site, Ethan woke from his nap and immediately began gesturing toward Guardian's kennel. Sarah, now acutely aware of their unusual connection, carried him over to where the dog was resting. Guardian, still weak from his seizure, managed to lift his head at their approach. His tail thumped weakly against the kennel floor. "It's okay, boy," Sarah whispered, kneeling down so Ethan could see the dog better. "We're going to figure this out." As if understanding her words, Guardian let out a soft whine and shifted closer to the kennel door, pressing his nose against the mesh, exactly where Ethan's small hand rested on the other side. Dr. Ramirez, observing from a few feet away, made a note in Guardian's chart. "Responsive to specific human, demonstrates recognition and preferential behavior." She paused, then added, "Connection appears mutual and consistent." Later that evening, after Mark Wilson had left with promises to email detailed treatment plans and legal paperwork, Jake Thompson offered to drive Sarah and Ethan home. The sun was setting over Bayou Creek, painting the sky in vivid oranges and purples that reflected in the still waters of the creek that gave the town its name. "Thank you for everything," Sarah said as they pulled up to her modest rental house. For the rescue, for checking in on Guardian, for caring? Jake smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling. Just doing my job, ma'am. I think we both know that's not true, Sarah replied softly. You've gone way beyond your job description. As Jake helped her carry Ethan's diaper bag to the front door, he hesitated, seeming to debate whether to say something more. Finally, he spoke. Sarah, I know it's not my place, but I'd be careful about this second chance organization. Something about Wilson doesn't sit right with me. Sarah tilted her head. You think he's not being honest? I think his priorities might not align with yours, Jake said carefully. Just make sure you read all the paperwork before you sign anything, okay? After Jake left, Sarah sat on her front porch swing, Ethan sleeping peacefully against her chest. The evening was quiet, except for the chirping of crickets and the occasional splash from the creek behind her property. She thought about Guardian, alone in his kennel at the clinic, and about the decision she faced. The experimental treatment could save the dog's life, but at what cost? Moving to Houston, even temporarily, would mean giving up her freelance clients, breaking her lease, and disrupting the fragile routine she'd established for Ethan. And then there were Jake's concerns about second chance, concerns she couldn't quite dismiss. As if sensing her troubled thoughts, Ethan stirred against her chest, his small hand clutching at her shirt. Sarah looked down at her son, remembering how rarely he had smiled before Guardian came into their lives, how quiet and withdrawn he had always been. What do you think, little man? She whispered. Should we follow the dog who found you, or should we find another way? The fifth twist came with the revelation that the old factory from which the toxic sludge leaked had been closed down years ago, but internal records showed recent visits made with falsified authorizations. Suspicions that someone was using the land for illegal dumping reignited the case in the media, pressuring environmental agencies and prompting a broader investigation. The morning headlines of the Bayou Creek Gazette blared, "Toxic secrets. Abandoned chemical plant becomes illegal dumping ground." The story, written by ambitious local reporter Megan Hayes, detailed Nathan Reed's findings and included quotes from EPA officials who had arrived in town the previous day. The accompanying photo showed the desolate Chemtech facility, chain link, fence torn in places, warning signs faded by years of sun and rain. Sarah Miller read the article with growing concern as she fed Ethan his breakfast. It had been 3 days since Guardian's seizure, and the dog was still at Dr. Ramirez's clinic, his condition stabilized, but far from improved. Mark Wilson had sent over a thick packet of paperwork regarding the proposed treatment program in Houston, but Sarah had yet to sign anything. Her phone rang, displaying Jake Thompson's number. They had spoken daily since the rescue, his gruff concern becoming a steady presence in her previously isolated life. "Have you seen the paper?" Jake asked without preamble. "I'm looking at it now," Sarah replied, wiping applesauce from Ethan's chin. "Is it really as bad as it sounds?" "Worse." Jake's voice was tight with suppressed anger. "The EPA team found evidence of at least a dozen separate dumping incidents over the past year. And get this, the security logs that Nathan found, they show access codes that were supposedly deactivated when the plant closed. Someone with inside knowledge has been getting in there." The implication hung in the air. This wasn't random environmental crime. It was systematic, organized, and potentially connected to former Chemtech employees. "Sarah," Jake continued, his voice dropping, "I think you should reconsider Wilson's offer, not because I trust him any more than I did before, but because I'm not sure Bayou Creek is safe for you and Ethan right now. Whoever's behind this dumping operation knows their illegal activities have been discovered, and they know Guardian was found there. You think they might come after us?" Sarah felt a chill despite the warm morning. "I think it's a possibility we can't ignore," Jake replied grimly. At least in Houston, you'd be far from whoever's behind this, with security provided by Second Chance. The conversation was interrupted by a knock at Sarah's door. Peering through the peephole, she saw Nathan Reed standing on her porch, looking even more disheveled than usual, a manila folder clutched in his hand. "Jake, I need to call you back. Nathan's here." She opened the door, and Nathan practically stumbled inside, his normally calm demeanor replaced by agitated energy. "Sarah, I'm sorry to barge in like this, but I found something you need to see." He placed the folder on her kitchen table, carefully moving aside Ethan's breakfast dishes. "These are the results of the soil and water samples from your backyard." "My backyard? When did you—" "2 days ago, when you mentioned Ethan had been playing in the creek. I took samples as a precaution." Nathan opened the folder, revealing pages of chemical analysis results. The water shows trace amounts of the same compounds found at the Chemtech site. Low levels, not immediately dangerous, but definitely present. Sarah felt the floor tilt beneath her. "Are you saying my son has been exposed to these chemicals?" Nathan nodded grimly. "It's possible. The creek behind your property eventually connects to the watershed near the Chemtech plant. I think contaminants have been leaching into the groundwater and moving through the entire system." "Oh my God." Sarah sank into a chair, pulling Ethan onto her lap protectively. Could this explain why Guardian was so drawn to our house? Was he detecting these chemicals somehow? Nathan considered this. Dogs have incredibly sensitive noses. It's not impossible that Guardian detected trace chemicals on Ethan that matched what was at the Chemtech site. He hesitated before adding, "There's something else. Dr. Ramirez called me this morning. She ran some additional tests on Guardian and found abnormal neurological responses, heightened sensitivity to certain frequencies, unusual brainwave patterns during sleep. She thinks the chemical exposure might have altered his nervous system in some way." This revelation cast the dog's behavior in a new light. His protective nature toward Ethan, the apparent synchronicity during the seizure. Could these be manifestations of neurological changes caused by the chemicals? Sarah's phone rang again. It was Dr. Ramirez. "Sarah, I think you should come to the clinic right away," the veterinarian said without greeting. "Guardian is showing some unusual behaviors, and I'd like Ethan here for comparison monitoring." Comparison monitoring? What does that mean? "I've been reviewing the data from Guardian's tests alongside what we know about the chemicals found at the dump site," Dr. Ramirez explained. "Some of these compounds are known to affect synaptic pathways. I have a theory about the connection between Guardian and Ethan, but I need more data." Within the hour, Sarah arrived at the clinic with Ethan and Nathan. They found not only Dr. Key Ramirez waiting for them, but also Mark Wilson and a woman introduced as Dr. Sophia Chen, a neurologist specializing in developmental disorders who consulted for Second Chance. The clinic's back room had been converted into a makeshift laboratory. Guardian, looking somewhat stronger than when Sarah had last seen him, was hooked up to monitoring equipment that measured his heart rate, brain activity, and other vital signs. A similar setup, modified for human use, waited nearby. "Before you ask, this is completely non-invasive," Dr. Chen assured Sarah, noting her concerned expression. "We're simply measuring physiological responses. No needles, no discomfort for Ethan." Dr. Ramirez explained their theory. The chemicals Guardian had been exposed to had enhanced certain neural pathways, particularly those involved in empathic response and sensory perception. In essence, the dog had developed an abnormal ability to sense and respond to human emotional states, specifically to Ethan's. "But why Ethan?" Sarah asked. "Why not me or anyone else?" This was where Nathan's findings became crucial. The trace chemicals found in the creek behind Sarah's house matched a specific signature of compounds from the Chemtech site. If Ethan had been exposed to these same chemicals through water or soil contact, it could have created a biochemical recognition between him and Guardian. It's like they're on the same frequency, Dr. Chen explained. Their neurological systems have been tuned to recognize each other at a level beyond normal perception. To test this theory, they conducted a series of simple experiments. Ethan was placed in one room with Dr. Chen, while Guardian remained in the monitoring area with Dr. Ramirez. When Ethan was startled by a sudden noise, Guardian's heart rate spiked simultaneously. When the baby was shown pictures that made him laugh, Guardian's brain activity shifted to patterns associated with positive emotion in canines. The most dramatic moment came when Ethan, growing tired and frustrated with the testing, began to cry. In the other room, Guardian immediately stood up, pulled against his gentle restraints, and let out a high-pitched whine that sounded uncannily like an echo of the baby's distress. "This is unprecedented," Dr. Chen murmured, reviewing the synchronized data feeds. "The neural mirroring is almost perfect." Mark Wilson could barely contain his excitement. "This confirms everything our research has suggested about enhanced animal-human communication. With your permission, Sarah, I'd like to move forward with the Houston program immediately. Guardian's condition is stable enough for transport, and our facility is equipped for continued monitoring of this extraordinary connection." Sarah, overwhelmed by the implications, looked to Dr. Ramirez for guidance. Medically speaking, Guardian would benefit from the specialized care they can provide, the veterinarian admitted. His system is still processing toxins, and the neurological changes we're seeing need expert monitoring. Jake Thompson arrived at the clinic just as they were discussing logistics for the move to Houston. He brought troubling news. The EPA investigation had uncovered internal Chemtech documents suggesting that experimental compounds had been developed at the facility before its closure, compounds not included in official records. They were working on something called Project Sync, Jake explained, showing them redacted documents he'd obtained from his contact at the EPA. The details are mostly blacked out, but from what I can gather, it involved neurological research using animal subjects. The implications were staggering. Could Guardian have been one of those research animals? Could his extraordinary connection with Ethan be not just a side effect of chemical exposure, but the result of deliberate experimentation? As the group digested this disturbing possibility, the clinic door burst open. Megan Hayes, the reporter from the Bayou Creek Gazette, strode in with a photographer in tow. "Is it true?" she demanded, her journalistic instincts overriding professional courtesy. "Is the Miller baby showing effects from chemical exposure? Are you planning to transport him and the dog to a research facility in Houston?" The room erupted in protests and denials. Mark Wilson stepped forward, his public relations training kicking in as he attempted to manage the situation. "Ms. Hayes, there's been a misunderstanding. Second Chance Animal Rescue is simply providing specialized medical care for a dog exposed to toxic waste. Any suggestion of human experimentation is completely unfounded and, frankly, irresponsible journalism." But Megan wasn't easily deterred. She held up her phone, displaying a text message with an attached image. "Then how do you explain this?" "It's a screenshot from a presentation you gave to potential donors last week, highlighting the unique synchronized neurological responses between a subject canine and human infant. You're fundraising off this case already, aren't you?" The accusation silenced the room. All eyes turned to Mark Wilson, whose composed expression faltered for the first time since Sarah had met him. "That presentation was preliminary and confidential," he said finally, "and while we are excited about the research potential, our primary concern is the welfare of both Guardian and Ethan. Sarah felt a surge of anger. You were using us to raise money before I'd even agreed to participate in your program? Before Mark could respond, another complication arrived in the form of an official-looking woman in a crisp suit, who introduced herself as Alison Parker from the Department of Child and Family Services. "We've received a concerning report about potentially hazardous living conditions," she explained, her professional demeanor barely masking her discomfort at interrupting the tense scene. "Given the media reports about chemical contamination and the suggestion that a child may have been exposed, we're obligated to investigate." As if the situation weren't chaotic enough, Guardian began to exhibit signs of distress, pacing in his enclosure, whining and fixating on the door. Moments later, a security alarm sounded from the front of the clinic. Dr. Ramirez rushed to check the surveillance monitor. "Someone's trying to break in through the back entrance," she reported, reaching for the phone to call 911. Jake Thompson, trained for emergency situations, took charge immediately. "Everyone stay calm. Dr. Ramirez, is there a secure room where Sarah and Ethan can wait?" "Whoa." As they hurried to follow Jake's instructions, Guardian broke free from his monitoring equipment, dashing towards Sarah and Ethan with surprising strength for a dog still recovering from toxic exposure. Rather than exhibiting aggression, he positioned himself protectively in front of them, his posture alert and watchful. The clinic's back door splintered open, revealing a man in dark clothing whose face was obscured by a ski mask. He froze upon seeing the assembled group, clearly not expecting so many witnesses. "Police are on their way," Jake called out, his voice steady and authoritative. "Whatever you're here for, it's not worth what's about to happen." The intruder hesitated, his gaze moving from Guardian to Ethan and back again. For a moment it seemed he might retreat, then he reached into his jacket. Guardian reacted with startling speed, launching himself toward the intruder with a power that belied his weakened condition. The man stumbled backward, falling through the broken door and scrambling to his feet outside. By the time Jake reached the doorway, the intruder was sprinting toward a waiting vehicle, which sped away before anyone could identify it. In the aftermath, as police secured the scene and took statements, Sarah held Ethan close. Guardian pressed against her legs, his vigilance unwavering, despite his obvious exhaustion from the burst of protective energy. "I don't understand," she said to no one in particular. "Why would anyone break into a veterinary clinic? What could they possibly want?" Dr. Chen, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. "Not what, Mrs. Miller, who? I believe they came for Guardian, or possibly for both Guardian and Ethan." The sixth twist in the unfolding drama was even more personal. Toxicological tests showed that Ethan had minimal traces of the same substances found in Guardian, suggesting prior exposure. This raised the possibility that both had had contact at the contamination site at different times, linking their stories in an even more complex way. As Guardian recovered from his heroic defense of the clinic, his neurological symptoms became more pronounced. The seventh twist occurred when it was discovered that the dog reacted extremely protectively whenever Ethan approached any unfamiliar person, as if he had instinctively assumed the role of guardian. In the week following the break-in at Dr. Ramirez's clinic, Bayou Creek transformed from a sleepy coastal town into the center of a media storm. News vans lined the main street, reporters staked out the clinic and Sarah's modest rental home, and local residents found themselves being interviewed about everything from environmental regulations to their personal experiences with stray animals. Sarah Miller, overwhelmed by the attention and increasingly concerned for Ethan's safety, finally agreed to Mark Wilson's proposal. Despite her reservations about Second Chance's intentions, the specialized care facility in Houston offered security and medical expertise that Bayou Creek simply couldn't provide. We'll arrange transportation for tomorrow morning, Mark told her, his earlier embarrassment over the fundraising revelation now replaced by efficient professionalism. Our security team will escort you and Ethan, while Dr. Ramirez will accompany Guardian in our specialized medical transport. Sarah nodded, too exhausted to argue. The past 24 hours had been a blur of police statements, hasty packing, and fielding concerned calls from clients worried about their design projects now that she was taking an unplanned leave of absence. Jake Thompson appeared at her door that evening, his fire department SUV providing a shield from the reporters who had been camped at the end of her driveway since dawn. "I brought dinner," he said simply, holding up bags from Bayou Creek's only decent restaurant. "Figured you might not have had time to cook." Sarah welcomed him in gratefully. Ethan was already asleep, the day's excitement having worn him out, and Guardian, who had been released to Sarah's care with strict medical protocols, lay beside the portable crib, his amber eyes alert despite his obvious fatigue. "Thank you," Sarah said, accepting the food. For everything, Jake. I don't know what we would have done without you through all of this." Jake shrugged, uncomfortable with gratitude as most men of action tend to be. "Just doing what anyone would do." He hesitated, then added, "I'm coming with you to Houston." Sarah looked up, surprised. "What? How?" "I've got 3 weeks of unused vacation time. Chief approved it this afternoon." Jake busied himself setting out the food containers, avoiding her gaze. "I don't trust this whole situation, and I'm not comfortable with you and Ethan facing it alone." The simple declaration brought unexpected tears to Sarah's eyes. Since her husband had walked out during her pregnancy, she had grown accustomed to handling every crisis on her own. The offer of support, solid, dependable support from someone who wanted nothing in return, was almost overwhelming. "I can't ask you to do that," she protested weakly. "You didn't ask. I'm offering." Jake finally met her eyes. "Besides, I've got a stake in this too. Guardian was my rescue, remember?" As if hearing his name, the German shepherd lifted his head and let out a soft whine, his gaze fixed not on the adults, but on the portable crib where Ethan slept. A moment later, the baby stirred and began to fuss. Sarah moved to check on him, but Guardian was faster. Despite his weakened state, he rose and positioned himself beside the crib, making a strange humming sound in his throat that Sarah had never heard before. To her amazement, Ethan's fussing subsided almost immediately. "How does he do that?" Sarah whispered, watching as her normally finicky son settled back to sleep at the mere presence of the dog. Jake shook his head in wonder. "I've seen search and rescue dogs find people buried under rubble, and therapy dogs calm the most agitated patients. But this is something else entirely." Dr. Chen's words echoed in Sarah's mind. They're on the same frequency. Whatever had happened to Guardian and Ethan, whether through accidental exposure or something more deliberate, had created a bond that defied conventional explanation. The following morning, the small convoy departed Bayou Creek before dawn to avoid the media. Guardian traveled in a specially equipped van with Dr. Ramirez, while Sarah and Ethan rode with Jake. Mark Wilson had gone ahead to prepare the facility for their arrival. The 4-hour drive to Houston passed uneventfully, though Sarah noticed that Ethan seemed increasingly agitated the further they got from the medical transport carrying Guardian. By the time they reached the outskirts of the city, the baby was inconsolable, screaming with a desperate intensity that nothing could soothe. "Can we pull over and check on Guardian?" Sarah asked, her own nerves frayed by Ethan's distress. "I think they need to be closer to each other." At a rest stop just outside Houston, Dr. Ramirez confirmed that Guardian had been exhibiting similar signs of distress, pacing, whining, and refusing food or water. When the medical transport was parked beside Jake's SUV, both Ethan and Guardian immediately calmed, as if sensing each other's proximity. "I've been monitoring his vitals throughout the journey," Dr. Ramirez told them, showing data on a tablet. "Look at this spike in heart rate and cortisol levels as we got further from your vehicle, and how quickly they normalized when we stopped." The Second Chance facility exceeded Sarah's expectations. Located in a quiet, wooded area on the outskirts of Houston, the modern building looked more like a wellness retreat than a research center. Security was discreet but thorough, with keycard access required at every door and surveillance cameras monitoring the perimeter. Dr. Chen greeted them personally, leading them to adjoining suites that had been prepared for Sarah, Ethan, and Guardian. The dog's quarters included medical monitoring equipment, but had been designed to look as home-like as possible, with comfortable bedding and toys. "We've arranged for Guardian's medical area to connect directly to your living space," Dr. Chen explained. "Based on what we observed in Bayou Creek, separation seems to exacerbate symptoms for both of them." The first week at the facility established a routine. Mornings were devoted to medical treatments for Guardian, including an experimental detoxification protocol designed to clear the remaining chemicals from his system. Afternoons involved careful monitoring of the interactions between Guardian and Ethan, with Dr. Chen and her team recording every detail of their remarkable connection. Guardian's protective instincts toward Ethan grew more pronounced as his strength returned. He developed a distinctive behavior pattern when strangers approached the baby, a low, rumbling sound that wasn't quite a growl, accompanied by intense eye contact with the potential threat. It wasn't aggressive exactly, but it was unmistakably a warning. "He's making risk assessments," Dr. Chen observed after watching Guardian interact with various staff members. "Notice how he relaxes almost immediately with people he's seen before, but remains vigilant with new faces until they've demonstrated positive behavior toward Ethan." Jake, who had taken a small apartment nearby, visited daily. He had become a fixture at the facility, his practical questions and no-nonsense approach, providing a welcome counterbalance to the researcher's sometimes overly academic perspective. It was Jake who first noticed Guardian's unusual reaction to one particular staff member, a maintenance worker who had recently joined the facility. When the man entered the observation room, Guardian positioned himself between the stranger and Ethan, his body rigid with tension. "That's odd," Jake commented to Dr. Chen. "Guardian hasn't reacted that strongly to anyone else on staff." Dr. Chen made a note, but didn't seem particularly concerned. Animals sometimes have inexplicable aversions to certain individuals. It could be as simple as the man's cologne triggering a negative association. But Jake's instincts, honed by years of emergency response work, wouldn't let it go. That evening, after Sarah had put Ethan to bed, he shared his concerns. "Something's not right about that maintenance guy. I can't put my finger on it, but Guardian clearly senses something off." Sarah had learned to trust Jake's judgment, and Guardian's even more so. "What do you think we should do?" "I'm going to do some digging," Jake said. "Nathan's been keeping me updated on the EPA investigation back in Bayou Creek. They're getting close to identifying who's been accessing the Chemtech site." 2 days later, Jake's persistence paid off. He arrived at the facility with Nathan Reed, who had driven down from Bayou Creek with a USB drive full of evidence. "We've got him," Nathan announced without preamble, connecting the drive to a computer in Sarah's suite. Security footage from a gas station near the Chemtech plant caught someone entering the facility 3 days before Guardian was found. The EPA enhanced the image. The grainy footage showed a man using an access card to enter a side gate, When Nathan froze the frame and zoomed in, Sarah gasped. Despite the poor quality, the face was unmistakable. It was the maintenance worker who had triggered Guardian's protective response. "His name is Robert Weaver," Nathan explained. "Former Chemtech lab technician, let go when the plant closed. According to EPA records, he was involved in something called Project Sync, an unauthorized research initiative that never appeared in official documents." The climax of the narrative occurred when, after weeks of investigation, security camera images from a nearby road revealed the person responsible for the dumping and the abandonment of the animal, a former factory employee with a history of cruelty complaints. The complaint was taken to the prosecutor's office and the case gained national proportions. The ninth twist happened when the NGO, pressured by media exposure, tried to transfer the dog to another city for advanced treatment. However, the baby entered a kind of emotional blockage, refusing to eat or interact. Child specialists warned that the bond created with the animal could be essential for the child's emotional well-being. The revelation of Robert Weaver's identity triggered a cascade of events that transformed what had been a local environmental scandal into a national story. The EPA, armed with evidence linking Weaver to illegal dumping at the Chemtech site, executed a search warrant on his Houston apartment, discovering notebooks detailing his continued experimentation with chemicals developed during Project Sync. He was trying to recreate the project on his own, Dr. Chen explained to Sarah, Jake, and the Second Chance team as they reviewed the findings. "From what we can piece together, Project Sync was exploring neurological enhancements that could create empathic links between species, originally for military applications, like bomb-sniffing dogs with heightened sensory perception." "But why target Guardian and Ethan?" Sarah asked, clutching her son closer as Guardian maintained his now familiar protective position at her feet. Nathan Reed, who had temporarily joined the EPA task force investigating the case, provided the missing piece. According to Weaver's notes, it wasn't intentional. Guardian was a test subject that escaped from his makeshift lab 6 months ago. He'd been tracking the dog ever since and eventually discovered he'd been frequenting your property. "The creek," Sarah whispered, remembering Nathan's discovery of trace chemicals in the water behind her house. "Guardian was contaminated, and then Ethan was exposed through the water," Dr. Chen nodded grimly. "Weaver saw it as an opportunity to observe the effects without direct intervention. His notes indicate he was monitoring both Guardian and Ethan for months before he realized the connection was becoming too obvious and potentially traceable back to him. So he tried to eliminate the evidence by dumping Guardian in toxic sludge," Jake concluded, his voice tight with controlled anger. He thought the chemicals would finish him off before anyone could investigate properly. The story broke in major news outlets the following day. "Rogue. Scientists used town as testing ground," headlined the Houston Chronicle, while national networks ran with "Toxic experiments created superhero dog." Overnight, Guardian became a symbol of resilience and the human-animal bond, with social media campaigns springing up to support his ongoing care. For Sarah and Ethan, the media attention was both blessing and curse. The publicity ensured that Weaver's case would be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, with multiple federal agencies filing charges related to environmental crimes, animal cruelty, and reckless endangerment. But it also turned their personal trauma into public property, with strangers offering opinions on everything from Sarah's parenting to Guardian's ultimate fate. 3 weeks into their stay at the Second Chance facility, with Guardian showing remarkable improvement under the experimental treatment protocol, Mark Wilson called a meeting to discuss next steps. "Guardian's progress has exceeded our expectations," he began, his tone carefully neutral. The toxin levels in his system have dropped to near normal ranges, and his neurological responses have stabilized. We believe he's ready for the next phase of treatment." "What next phase?" Sarah asked, immediately wary. "You said once the detoxification was complete, we could return home." Mark exchanged glances with Dr. Chen before continuing. "Our research partners at the University of California have developed an advanced neural mapping technique that could help us better understand Guardian's enhanced capabilities. Their facility in San Diego is the only one equipped for this kind of specialized study." The implication was clear. Second Chance wanted to transfer Guardian across the country for further research. "Absolutely not," Sarah said firmly, surprising herself with her conviction. "Guardian has been through enough. So has Ethan. We're going home to Bayou Creek as soon as he's medically cleared." Mark's professional veneer cracked slightly. "Mrs. Miller, I don't think you understand the scientific significance of what we're dealing with here. Guardian represents a breakthrough in cross-species neural connectivity. The research potential is—" "He's not a research subject," Jake interrupted, moving to stand beside Sarah. "He's a dog who's been abused in the name of science once already, and more importantly, he's Ethan's companion." The argument escalated, with Mark eventually revealing that Second Chance had filed paperwork claiming legal custody of Guardian as an abandoned animal surrendered to their care. Technically, Sarah had never formally adopted him, having agreed only to the treatment program in Houston. "You planned this from the beginning," Sarah realized, her voice hollow. "All that talk about Guardian's well-being was just to get access, and to him for your research." Mark had the grace to look somewhat ashamed. "Our intentions were never malicious, Sarah. We genuinely want what's best for Guardian. But yes, we also recognize his scientific importance." The following day, Guardian and Ethan were scheduled for what was supposed to be a routine monitoring session. Instead, Sarah arrived to find a transport team preparing to move Guardian to a different wing of the facility, the first step, she later learned, in his planned relocation to California. "What's going on?" she demanded, blocking their path. "To Guardian's enclosure. No one said anything about moving him today." Dr. Chen stepped forward, apologetically. "I'm sorry, Sarah. The decision was made by the board this morning. Guardian's legal status has been reviewed, and Second Chance has been granted temporary custody pending full evaluation." What happened next would be debated by witnesses for years to come. As the transport team approached Guardian with a specialized harness, Ethan, who had been quietly observing from Sarah's arms, let out a high-pitched wail unlike anything she had ever heard from him. It wasn't just distress, it was a sound of pure anguish that seemed to vibrate the air itself. Guardian responded instantly, not with aggression, but with what could only be described as focused intent. He moved to Sarah and Ethan, positioning himself against them in a protective stance that made the transport team hesitate. "Please step back," Dr. Chen instructed Sarah. "We need to sedate him for safe transport." But Sarah stood her ground, Ethan's cries intensifying as Guardian pressed closer to them. "No, you're not taking him." Over the next 48 hours, a medical crisis unfolded that no one had anticipated. Separated from Guardian by force and sedation, Ethan descended into what pediatric specialists called acute attachment distress. He refused food and water, became unresponsive to stimuli, and developed a low-grade fever that resisted treatment. Guardian, meanwhile, placed in a secure area of the facility's veterinary wing, exhibited similar symptoms of decline. His vital signs, stable for weeks, began to deteriorate despite the continuation of his medical protocol. Dr. Leslie Morgan, a child psychiatrist called in to consult on Ethan's case, delivered a stark assessment to the second transport of directors. What we're observing is a severe emotional withdrawal that could have lasting developmental consequences. In my professional opinion, the bond between this child and this animal is not just emotional. It appears to have physiological components that we don't fully understand. As Ethan's condition worsened, Sarah made a desperate appeal to the local family court, seeking an emergency injunction to reunite her son with Guardian. The case attracted pro bono representation from one of Houston's top law firms, whose senior partner happened to be a devoted animal lover. The court hearing was expedited due to Ethan's medical situation. Sarah's attorney presented evidence from Dr. Morgan and Ethan's pediatrician, along with data showing the parallel decline in Guardian's health since the separation. Your Honor, the attorney argued, we have a unique situation where the well-being of both a child and an animal are demonstrably interdependent. The scientific research potential, while valuable, cannot outweigh the immediate health concerns of a child. Second Chance's legal team countered with arguments about the broader good that could come from studying Guardian's condition and the technical legalities of animal ownership that gave them valid claim to the dog. In the 10th and final twist, an emergency judicial decision was granted, allowing the dog to remain with the family, with medical support at home. The outcome was emotional but not predictable. The German Shepherd never fully regained his vitality, but became a symbol of a rare kind of bond, one that emerges between beings who, even without words, recognize each other's pain. Judge Eleanor Simmons, a 30-year veteran of the family court system with a reputation for no-nonsense pragmatism, delivered her ruling after just 40 minutes of deliberation. In cases involving the welfare of a child, this court is bound to prioritize that child's best interests above all other considerations, she stated firmly. The medical evidence presented clearly indicates that separation from the animal known as Guardian poses a significant risk to Ethan Miller's health and development. Her decision was unequivocal. Guardian would be legally adopted by the Miller family, with Second Chance granted limited rights to continue non-invasive monitoring of both Guardian and Ethan, provided all procedures took place in Bayou Creek under strict oversight. The reunion, which took place in a quiet room at the facility, under Dr. Morgan's supervision, brought tears to the eyes of even the most hardened observers. Ethan, who had been listless and unresponsive for days, visibly animated at Guardian's approach. The dog, still weakened from his own stress response, moved with deliberate gentleness to the baby's side, resting his head against Ethan's small body with a sigh that seemed to contain equal parts exhaustion and relief. Within hours, both showed signs of improvement. Ethan accepted a bottle for the first time in days, while Guardian's vital signs stabilized and his alertness returned. 2 weeks later, Sarah, Ethan, and Guardian returned to Bayou Creek, accompanied by Jake Thompson, whose vacation time had stretched into an indefinite leave of absence. The town welcomed them with a quiet celebration, respectful of all they had endured, but determined to show their support. Dr. Ramirez had prepared her clinic for Guardian's ongoing care, with specialized equipment donated by medical suppliers who had followed the story in the news. Nathan Reed, now heading up a comprehensive environmental remediation of the area surrounding the Chemtech plant, had overseen testing of Sarah's property to ensure it was free of contaminants. Life settled into a new normal. Guardian never regained the robust health he might have enjoyed without the toxic exposure, and certain neurological quirks remained: his extraordinary sensitivity to Ethan's emotional states, his vigilant assessment of strangers, the occasional tremors that would come and go without warning. But in their quiet way, he and Ethan thrived together. As the months passed, Sarah observed how her son, once so withdrawn, blossomed in the presence of his canine guardian. Ethan's pediatrician, initially skeptical of the neurological connection theory, became a believer after witnessing their interactions during checkups. "I can't explain it medically," the doctor admitted, "but whatever happened to them created something special. Ethan's development is actually accelerating now. His verbal skills, his emotional responses, his social interactions. It's as if Guardian is somehow helping him navigate the world." Jake Thompson became a fixture in their lives, his initial protective instinct evolving into something deeper and more permanent. One evening, as they sat on Sarah's porch swing, watching Guardian and Ethan play in the yard, the dog moving with careful gentleness, the toddler squealing with delight, Jake finally put words to what had been building between them. "I'm not going back to my old position," he said quietly. "Chief offered me a training role that would keep me here in Bayou Creek permanently, if that's something you and Ethan would be okay with." Sarah took his hand, feeling for the first time in years that life had given her not just challenges, but also unexpected gifts. "I think we'd all be more than okay with that." Guardian, as if sensing the moment's significance, looked up from his play with Ethan and gave what Sarah had come to think of as his smile, a relaxed, open expression, and that transformed his watchful face into something joyful. He would never be an ordinary dog, just as Ethan would never be an ordinary child. The bond between them, forged in mysterious circumstances that science was still struggling to understand, had created something rare and precious, a connection that transcended species, that required no words, that recognized and honored the essential spirit in each of them. In the years that followed, researchers would continue to study them, publishing papers on the Bayou Creek case that would influence fields from neurology to animal behavior. The chemical compounds that had created their connection would eventually lead to breakthroughs in treating certain neurological disorders. But for Sarah, Jake, Ethan, and Guardian, the science mattered less than the daily reality of their shared lives, the quiet moments, the small triumphs, the unwavering presence of a being who, without words, had become the most eloquent expression of loyalty she had ever known. In Guardian, who had survived abandonment and toxic exposure to become not just a pet but a protector, Ethan had found his voice. And in Ethan, the dog had found his purpose, a reason to fight, to heal, to live each day with the special vigilance of those who have recognized in another soul a reflection of their own resilience. "Some bonds," Jake observed one evening as they watched Ethan sleeping peacefully with Guardian at the foot of his bed, "don't need explanation, they just are." Sarah nodded, understanding completely. In a world of science and logic, of cause and effect, there remained mysteries that defied simple explanation, connections that reminded us that the heart has reasons that reason cannot know. And in Bayou Creek, a small coastal town that had seen its share of environmental battles and human dramas, the most powerful story was the one that unfolded quietly, day by day, between a boy and his dog. Two beings who, without words, had found in each other the healing that neither science nor medicine alone could provide. Dear listeners, we hope that Sarah and Ethan's journey with Guardian has touched your hearts. Their story reminds us that the most powerful connections often transcend words, and that healing can come from the most unexpected places. For more emotionally captivating stories like this one, we've prepared a special playlist that explores similar themes of resilience and unconditional bonds. Find it by clicking to your left. If this story moved you, please subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up. Every day, we bring you unique narratives that explore the complexity and beauty of life's unexpected connections. Don't miss our upcoming content, and please share your thoughts in the comments below. What special bond have you witnessed between a child and an animal? We'd love to hear your stories.